care.
You should care.
I should care. All right,
You should
Justin,
care.
introduce our guest today.
All right, today we have with us another fantastic guest, Cherie Guy. Now, in full transparency, Cherie Guy does happen to be my wife.
Absolutely.
And you just admitted that on camera.
I did.
She did.
I did.
All right.
Unfortunately, I've been guided that I should tell the truth.
Oh, it's going to be one of those kind of shows.
It is, Tristan.
So, Justin, I'll let you kind of lead the way. You have an idea of what you want this podcast to do. So have at her.
Okay. All right. Well, Cherie, everybody's got a testimony, and as you know, it's the journey to the cross. So where does that journey begin with you?
Well, I think the biggest and most significant thing that I always try to remember in telling my testimony is that even though we don't start with the end, one of the most important parts of anything that we go through is there's a but God at the end of each segment in our lives. And as we've learned to surrender to Him, there's a but God. And that is for me. So as I started my journey in life, I always want to remind folks, there's a but God in every
All right,
story.
let me clarify just a second.
Sure.
You're 1T, correct?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, because
except-
I usually get kicked in the backside when I'm not following God. Just clarifying,
Yes.
yours is just a single T.
It's a single T.
Okay,
yes.
good. Go ahead.
But if I were not compliant, there'd be a double T. Thank you for clarification,
You bet.
Tristan. Okay. But anyway, my journey started early, obviously, in a small town in Norton, Virginia. And I go back to that because I was adopted. And
you were?
Yes, I was adopted. And it is much been a conversation in my family when that happened, whether or not I was 2 days old or 7 days old. So I had to split it in the middle and say 6 days.
Okay.
Actually, not in the middle,
Just
but
a baby.
close enough. I was a baby, yes. And so my parents got a phone call from Norton Community Hospital, and they had a baby available for adoption, and that was me. And I think the most significant story in that whole situation is my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was in the Cabbage Patch at this time, and she really was in the Cabbage Patch when they called her to tell her. But yeah, I was adopted, and my parents came to Norton, picked me up, and from there on, I started my journey in my life in Gate City, Virginia.
Now, did they have other children?
No.
So
no,
this
I
is
was
just
the
the
only
one
child.
and only? You were one and only child?
I was the one and only child. Absolutely.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So they adopted me, and my early childhood started in Gate City, which borders Kingsport, Tennessee. So when I say my hometown, I'm referring to Gate City, Virginia, but literally within eye line sight is Tennessee.
Okay.
And so it was so close that our address and our phone number, as a child, I was living in Tennessee according to the address.
Okay.
Up until the 911 system came, and then it reflected Gate City.
So you're claiming your Tennessean status.
Well, yes.
Okay. All right.
I was already evolved.
I understand.
So
Go Vols.
I was evolved at that point. But anyway, that's where I spent my early childhood. And my childhood, just like everybody else's, I mean, I grew up in a rural community, small 2,000 person community. It's a little more famous now because we have a basketball player that came from there, Mac McClung, the dunk championship guy.
Okay.
Three-peat. That's Mac. That's his hometown. But that's where I grew up. I think the biggest part of my journey, though, is what a trajectory that changed early in my life when I was 4. And when I was 4 years old, we had a catastrophic car accident. And what I mean by catastrophic is it changed the trajectory of who I became as a person. We hit a bridge in West Curtis Valley in Tennessee, and it was a big steel bridge. It's not today, it's concrete today. But as we hit the bridge, my dad was driving, and my mom was on the right-hand side. And as we made contact with the bridge, the vehicle, of course, stopped. And when that vehicle stopped, my mom opened her door, my dad opened his door, and there became an argument over who was going to get me, who was going to take me out of their side of the car. And that doesn't seem so significant until you realize a little more down the story. So
clarify for me. Mm-hmm. So the car stopped because it hit the bridge?
It hit the bridge. It cornered the bridge on the right side of the car. It was raining really hard.
Okay, so you ran into the bridge.
We ran into the bridge.
All right.
And as my mom opened her door and Dad opened his door, I look over to my dad, and I do remember this. My dad had knocked his teeth out, his 2 front teeth,
Wow.
on the steering wheel. It was a pretty big impact.
Wow.
And I had contacted the windshield, and there was, evidence of blood coming down my face, and there's a scar there. But as that transpired, and they had that conversation over which side I was going to go to, my dad pulls me out his side, and the most significant beginning of my life, other than my adoption, starts right now, and that's my mom opens the door. She plummets 50 feet down onto a train trestle.
Oh.
She breaks her T4 and T5 vertebra. Thusly, she was a paraplegic for the rest of her life.
Wow.
And what we didn't understand at that time, I was 4. I just, it was like December the 26th, the day after Christmas. We were visiting some family friends, and I didn't understand at that time, nobody did, that it would change everything, and it did. I think the biggest thing out of that day, and I can remember the smells, I can remember things about it, being in the ambulance and being with the lady in a truck before the ambulance. I can remember so many things about that night, but the most significant was that my mom was hurt.
Yeah.
And my dad, as he pulled me out and they got me located, he went down to help my mom. And we had no idea what was going to transpire. They kept her in Kingsport for a couple of days. And then she went on to Atlanta, Georgia to be seen. They specialized, I think it was at the Shepherd Center, in paraplegia and those type things, events that happen in your life that change, your physical being.
Is that your earliest memory? Or do you have memories before that?
I have one before that. It's my grandfather holding me at a Christmas tree, and I was plucking all the ornaments off of the tree, and my mom found great displeasure in that. But that's the only memory I have prior to that.
Oh, wow. So that laid a foundation for you. That's your earliest memory, and 4 years old, you say?
4.
And you were in the front seat?
I was in the front seat, Monte Carlo. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So then what?
Well, there's lots of things that transpired. I think the biggest thing that anybody would want to know is, and this is where the beginning of my life takes a different turn. Obviously, I became a parent in many ways because I was responsible for my mom to a certain degree. I was the only other person in the house with my dad. And so responsibility set in very young for me, and it was then. But they also, the unique thing about my mom and my dad is they had a case against each other in court regarding this
Car
accident.
Yeah.
And you can look it up. It's McMillan versus McMillan. It's still on the docket.
It was an insurance company dispute, basically.
It was.
Yeah.
But it started a sense of dispute in my family. You would just have to understand them to understand how much impact that lawsuit happened.
So were they suing each other so that they could get insurance, or were they suing each other because they had something against each other?
Effectively, one insurance company, because we were in the Tennessee-Virginia line, okay, what was the discussion was my mom worked for Eastman Chemical, and there was a situation that there was an insurance coverage thing about who was going to be the governing body.
Okay.
Would it be Tennessee or Virginia? It happened in Tennessee, and there was discussion about that. But the case is still out there. I have a cousin that's an attorney, and he reminds me from time to time that it's still a case.
Wow.
But that was the most significant legal thing that came out of it. But
Getting back to what you had to deal with and being a parent as a child, you didn't mention your mom was also a type 1 diabetic, correct? And she struggled with that as well.
my mom was a type 1. She was 19 when she was diagnosed, when she, became known as a type 1. So that meant that her care and those things for her were very different. Thusly, that's why they didn't choose to have children. They adopted me. But mom required care because of that, because it was a significant, they actually called her, a brittle diabetic later on in life.
Brittle being fragile?
Brittle being the terminology they use for an over and over situation over time.
Diabetics heal slower than the average person.
Okay.
And so when you've got a big injury on top of that, I think that's when they label it kind of a brittle diabetic situation.
Okay.
When you've got, paraplegia factored in with type 1 diabetes.
And how old was she when this accident happened?
My mom was 30 and my dad was 31.
Okay.
So they were very young. But after the accident and those things, and you have to understand that the subsequent things that followed that was 10 major surgeries, 175 stitches, and enough blood to replace an entire human body. That's what it took to keep my mom alive. And I saw those things. And as a child, you don't understand that when you go to see somebody at a rehabilitation center and you see folks without arms or without legs or whatever it is their circumstance, and you see it over and over, your natural response to that as a child is to callous yourself.
Yeah.
Because you can't focus and you can't see things like that all the time and be able to absorb them. And I didn't understand that it would definitely change who I was as I grew up, just being able to cope and understand the things that were going on around me.
Now, Justin has let me know that you have kind of gone over in your mind what you'd like to share. And one of the things that Justin and I are discovering is that we can go off on all kinds of different tangents. So I don't want to derail that, but I just want to encourage you. You got a destination that you want to head today with your testimony. So laser focus on that.
Okay.
Let's go to, I know that your folks went to church. You were raised in church.
Yep.
How did their faith affect what they went through, what you went through? Tell us about that.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is my mom's entire family was involved in the ministry in the Methodist church, and I grew up in church. And so I think their faith played an integral role, especially later in life, because my mom, she began to understand that in those moments when you're being rehabilitated or whatever you're going through, you've got to have somebody with you that helps you to cope and quote unquote walk through things. And my mom leaned on the Lord, and she talked a lot about that in those moments that she was still and quiet and in a lot of pain. She dealt with a lot of pain, that God was always there. And so that was the beginning of my journey through faith, was in the Methodist church. As I grew a little older, my dad and his friend eventually started a church.
Oh, wow.
And it was called Tree of Life Ministries. And so through my high school years, it was at Tree of Life Ministry.
So your folks made it through relationally. They did okay? They stayed together?
They did.
Okay.
They did.
Okay.
They did.
All right.
They made it through. And there was a lot of conflict in my house.
Yeah.
And those are one of the things that I've often said is that as parents, we need to exemplify to our children who the Lord is. And what that means is love. We need to show love. And in my home, there was a lot of pain because of my mom's circumstances. And I think that was a uniqueness in my life, but I think it also gave me another opportunity to understand and appreciate love in a different way.
Yeah. And fighting fair in a marriage is very important. Fighting, knowing that you love the other person. In fact, Justin and I have talked a lot about that, and he would love to win one of the fights, but just so you know, and maybe in the future he can win one.
I am correct occasionally.
There were those 2 times.
We've talked.
2 times.
Those 2 times. So we have talked, and you tell me that a lot of your dad's anger issues and things, some of the stuff he suffered with was because he felt guilty. He struggled with guilt and things like that. And
so one of the things that my dad often communicated, and I don't think he ever meant to, was that there was a lot of pain to do with that accident. My mom felt like the night before that she'd heard from the Lord, and he told her not to go that night, that we were going.
Really? So she was feeling kind of disobedient.
Yeah, and she communicated to my father, to my dad, that, I just really don't believe the Lord wants me to go. I really don't want to go. And Dad had pressured her, and she had made that decision, and so he lived with that. And I think essentially what happened is that bitterness moved in, and it became an integral cornerstone of our home. Bitterness in my dad from the fact that he was angry at my mom for being in a wheelchair. Bitterness at himself because he felt like he made the decision to put her there and going out that night. And then my mom suffering had a bitterness in its own because she was angry at why did this happen to me.
Did they ever have victory over that? Or
My mom did. My mom did. And, I remember so many times praying for my mom. seeing her change emotionally over this. But yeah, she let it go. I was probably in my 20s.
Okay.
And I remember significantly, we were praying for her. I had my hands on her. And we were praying for her. And God changed her mind that day. He set her free from the captivity of being bound by that injury. And the wheelchair still contained her. But it wasn't like a prison. It was like she was free.
Okay.
And she learned to love in a different way. And I had no idea the impact of my mom's unconditional love until I got older. And now I know exactly what that means to unconditionally love your children. And I believe that my mom totally did have that love for me.
Now, are your folks still alive?
No, both my parents have passed. My mom passed this past mid-November. She was 78, so she spent a long time in a chair.
Right.
But I prayed to the Lord of how she would pass, and I asked him to just let her go to sleep, and she did.
We had the blessing of caring for her in our home the last 6 years, and she came to church with us here at Crossroads Cowboy Church, and she had her own little spot up front where she could park her wheelchair, and it was a blessing, and I think I saw her relationship with Cherie grow exponentially during that time, and I think they got to a good place before she passed, so it was good.
There's nothing like being able to tuck a loved one into eternity. Both my folks are home with the Lord, and so I understand that letting go. But it's nice when there's a resolve. Did your mom ever get a chance to speak to your dad, or did he pass before that?
So as I left the home later in my life, I mean, I've left numerous times, but I mean, actual physical area close to them. They developed a different relationship, and I think for the most part, they had come to love each other again in a way that, and they always had that forever I'm committed love.
Yeah.
But the love that endears and that just gives you a feeling of this is the person I belong with. I felt that in the last few years of my dad's life. Unfortunately, he had Alzheimer's and dealt a lot with his memory.
Okay.
And so we had that issue. But my mom would ride a Nets Trans as a handicapped person and ride down to see him and take him a hamburger and some of his favorite things. And so that, to me, showed her way of extending her love to him. And they would sit and talk and do normal married people things, although they lived apart.
For you, that's a wonderful gift and blessing. That you can rest in the fact that God continued to work with your parents and their relationship, and you were able to witness to that. That's wonderful. Yeah,
watching them repair the things that could have been taken at the devil's hand, obviously. It was a blessing for me, watching them come out of that. And my mom not being bitter and being able to enjoy life is one of the greatest gifts God ever gave me. Truthfully. He gave me a gift in my mom, and that, watching her be here and be happy. And that meant something to me, for sure.
So we've got the foundation of the childhood. So I asked this question to most of our guests. Did you go through a rebellious teenage, young adult stage?
Wow. Yes, of course. Not that that's written anywhere, but yeah, I went through those moments of trying, whatever situation with my father. He's very cut and dry, very militaristic in different ways. There were certain things that he expected from you, and that's part of my story is that my mom did not get that opportunity to spend my early life with me. She was in a rehabilitation home,
right,
or any of those things, and my dad shaped very much who I became. And he did not look at me, unfortunately, as being a male or female. He just looked at me as a person. And it was a gift in many ways because there was nothing that he thought I couldn't do. But on the other hand, there was nothing he thought I couldn't do. And so I was very capable because he did not want to disable me in being able to do the things I needed to do to survive. And I learned those things from him out of necessity because he would not allow someone to, his words were, quote unquote, baby me. And so he was often a little harder, and it very much shaped who I became, but it's been a great journey to learn that way.
Well, maybe that's a balance thing. As your dad leans one way to make you self-capable, and then you see your mom who isn't real capable and people are having to take care of her, that brought you into a good balance of the two. I don't know. I'm just observing here on the tour guide bus here of your life.
I think that's a good way to describe it, that there was some balance. And what was unique about my parents is they were so different. My dad was a country person, raised in a small farming community, and my mother was much more privileged. I'll say it that way.
Was it kind of a Green Acres situation?
Oh, it was very Green Acres.
Really, so kind of, I don't know if I can say that, like a country hick type thing?
I think that's a good descriptive. Yes.
And you often marry someone who's like your dad. Just...
Indeed, Tristan, indeed.
I believe you said something similar to that a time or two.
I did. You remind me of my dad. So, but my mom was very, very different in how, like, the way she lived. Just a very put together kind of person, even though she was in a wheelchair. She made an appearance on the Today Show once.
Really?
Yes. And so, of course,
was she invited?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just checking.
Yeah,
she didn't
absolutely.
Just
they invited her.
Okay. So, just checking.
But she just talked to them about coping with her injuries and what that looked like, and the finality of having a back fusion and all those things, and then how she got through to do things for herself because she could drive. She drove for a long time with hand controls. And so that was what the Today Show article and the TV appearance was about, was you can be an overcomer.
She was doing this kind of stuff back before handicapped people were doing this kind of stuff.
She did. Before it was, in the late 70s, she was driving.
Yeah.
So she was hand controlled.
This has been a minute. So.
But the grand thing, and Justin talked a little bit about my rebellious stage there. There were types... there were parts of that showed themselves, but there were some good things that came out of my mom being injured and things that happened. They needed me, like, to drive. And so I got to drive very early, and I got to do some things that it was not always negative. And so there were some privileges that came out of the situation, too. And it lends themselves to a couple of those behavioral things that Justin talked about. And one of those was I drove myself to Bible school. I was 12. And I drove myself...
Whoa. Okay. Mm-hmm. You drove yourself to Bible school when you were 12.
I was 12. And so here's what happened.
This is rural Virginia, okay?
My parents left me with my grandfather, okay? Now remember, I gave you guys a preview to my early childhood of pulling the ornament. He was the grandfather that was holding me. And he allowed all things, okay? All things are possible through him, in his eyes, And so he taught me, and his instructions to driving were drive it or park it. And so it was a real extensive driving, class. But he literally said, if you want to go to Bible school, drive yourself. So I did.
Now, when you say Bible school, do you mean Sunday school on Sunday?
No, Bible school, like you have an entire week of vacation Bible school, and you go and so I got in his truck and I drove myself to Bible school, and that was fairly normal. Yeah.
And so, I know, go ahead.
Okay.
My dad found out about it much later in my life. I was probably in my 20s before I disclosed this situation.
I mean, we laugh about it now because in today's world, that's crazy. But you got to remember, in rural East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, they're very similar. I learned to drive a tractor and a truck on the farm at age 10, 11, 12. It wasn't unusual for your younger children to be able to operate machinery. I mean, that was normal on the farm in the 70s and 80s. And
those times. I suppose. That kind of reminds me of my stories. My dad, he was very independent. He was the youngest kid out of several that were like 16 years was the gap between my dad and his closest sibling. And so he was kind of independent, but he told me stories of, and this was in the Seattle area, in North Seattle, Washington State there. He would get on the bus on Saturday mornings, and he'd go down and he'd hang out in downtown Seattle all day long, and then he'd get on the bus and come back home. This was when he was 6.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's one of those things where I can relate to it. It was a different world then.
Yeah.
And it very much was. But I think the entire this situation where we were in backwoods Virginia, and on a single lane road and those type things. But I learned early on if I wanted to go somewhere, I'd just take myself.
Okay.
So that was rebellious.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so you had the typical rebellious stage. What's the next big event in your life?
I think the next biggest event, obviously, I graduate from high school, start college, and in that time frame, and I go back to my journey to the cross. At 13, I accepted the Lord into my life and went before the congregation and my dad's friend's church, and my life started to change. And I felt that the same tug everybody else feels. Nobody comes to the Lord but by the Spirit drawing them. And I felt that draw, and I accepted the Lord, and my life started to change. And as I got out of high school, I had, obviously I had to think about things I was going to do. One of the first big life decisions was going to be whether or not I was going to be a physical therapist. And early on in my career, working in that field, I decided no, absolutely not, because of empathy and sympathy. I'm not so good at that in that way. And so, just life choices started happening. So I went on to college, stayed at my parents' house for a little while. And then
just want to, you mentioned empathy and sympathy.
Yes.
As something that you're not good at or don't have capacity for?
It's on the other end of that, Tristan. I think my situation became, I would feel so sorry for somebody, I was not the most capable to help them. And part of that had been with my mom and seeing the things I had seen. They just resonated with me differently. And I had a 93-year-old, and one of the procedures you do in the hospital is called pull a sheet. And when I went to pull the sheet, I pulled it out from under her, and I felt like I hurt her. And it really bothered me deep down that I could not draw that line. I didn't want to hurt somebody to help somebody. That's not something I was good at. And so I had to then make some life decisions about what I was going to do. And life comes along, and eventually I end up in college, business college, and finish my degrees. But through that time, we're now transitioning from the Methodist church to a church that my dad started with his friend onto a Pentecostal church. So things changed in my life.
Oh, so the Pentecostal expression, that was a new thing, or were the Methodists leaning that way too?
Okay, so my dad leaned that way. He had friends that did different revivals and things, and they leaned more on the Pentecostal side, even though they were in the Methodist church. And so I had seen this particular gentleman, Bob Knight. And I had spent some time at Bob Knight's church going to different revivals, and this guy believed in the Lord. And it was phenomenal. But thusly, what springs out of that eventually is Dad ends up in what I would consider a Pentecostal church in Kingsport, Tennessee, known as Agape Life.
Okay.
Was it your grandparents that went to the church that was split? Tell us about that, because that's interesting.
I did forget one part of my journey that's kind of, it's really funny. So my grandparents, as they took me to church, you got to realize that as my mom was in these rehabilitation homes, somebody had to take care of me. And so that was them. And so, of course, you're going to church with the same grandfather that let me drive wherever I wanted to go. But so I went to their church, and their church was half Methodist and half Baptist in the same church.
Did they separate sides?
Yes.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
And alternated Sundays between pastors.
Yes. And so this Sunday...
Does the same congregation experience both?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, so
what
Sunday...
Town, what neighborhood town was this in?
This is it's right outside of Gate City, on the way down to a popular restaurant there known as the Hobnob.
Okay.
So, but anyway, I'm fairly certain, please don't hold me to this, but I think the Methodist side was the right side and the Baptist side was the left side. And my grandmother always
Which would be
right
different
side.
Nowadays.
Oh,
Just go ahead.
So anyway, you went into the church and you sat on your side. And I can't remember if my parents got married there or my grandparents, but somebody got married there. But anyway, yeah.
I thought that was interesting. I mean, you hear stuff like that.
And what was funny was the unity in the church. There was you never felt like there was an argument over the Methodist or the Baptist. I mean, you just never felt that.
You know, when I do Bible studies and such, you always need somebody's Uncle Bob, or someone who's just he doesn't care what people think, and he'll just say what's on his mind, because that makes a Bible study where people tend to try to present their best self and be polite. Not Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob will just say, "That's a bunch of hogwash. I don't believe it for a minute." And all of a sudden your Bible study gets a little reactive, and people are scrambling and flipping pages in their Bible to defend their position. Not that you want combat, but you do want to, as iron sharpens iron, provoking one another to good works. So I could see that might be just a really interesting church to be in.
That's what I thought.
It was interesting, and I never thought anything about it really until I said something to Justin, and he said,
Yeah, she didn't think it was that odd.
"Are
I'm like,
you
that's
serious?"
really, really odd.
He was like,
Yeah.
"Please explain," and I was like, "There's nothing to explain. One side was this, and one side was that." But to him, that was very unique. To me, it was just a circumstance.
Okay, which side had the better part of the potluck?
I'd have to say, but this is in defense of my husband, obviously, but the Baptist side.
Oh,
The Baptists like to eat.
Okay, yeah. All right. I
About the truth thing. Anyway,
So, okay, you got into college, you finished up some degrees. Where did you end up working at in the end?
so in the end, I worked for a major manufacturer of lawn and garden equipment. And I don't say the name out of respect, but I worked there a long time.
Were they green and yellow?
It could have been.
Okay.
But I worked there for about 22 years. So, but they made those degrees possible, the last two. And they gave me an opportunity to fly and go to different places. And during this time, my faith, I always knew, even early childhood, there was a God. And I knew that he was the God of creation, and he was the entity, if you will, that gave me to my parents, because I knew that not everybody grew up as privileged as I was to have a home. And I was very grateful. And I think one of the things early on that the Lord gave me in my life was gratefulness. Because when I got my driver's license, when I became legal and went through all those things, because I was not always, cognizant of that type of situation, but I went to my parents and I said, "Thank you for my driver's license," because to me it was a privilege. And I thank God that he gave me that gratefulness inside my heart for everything that I got, including a home, because he gave me that home, and there's no doubt about that.
So, currently, present day, what is your involvement, even here at the church?
Well, did you meet anybody important at that manufacturer of green and yellow power equipment?
Well, we don't. That's kind of a. That's
she
kind
might
of
have met somebody really important.
I don't know, Justin. I
did in that journey. First of all, in that journey, I adopted Emma as one of the most important and significant things in my life was to give my adoption back, and it's not the reason, but it's part of my journey in my life was to exude or show that gratefulness. And so I adopted Emma. She was, and I was in Thibodaux, Louisiana at the time, working for that major manufacturer. And I got Emma at 2 days old, and we've had her ever since. And so that was a significant moment in my life. But I also want to say at that time I was very much married to my job, and that's all that mattered. It was my God. And it is the first time I made a life-altering decision was to put success above everything in my life, except for Emma. But I did make that choice. I did. I put it above my marriage. I put it above every situation that I had going on in my life was that success. And it came at a price. It came at a heavy price. And I knew, the plant manager came to see me. We're bringing this new line in. You're going to manage this. All these kind of things happened. And at that time, all I saw was, look at this ladder. And all I got to do is succeed. But what I didn't realize, and what I look back now retrospectively and see, is that I chose success over everything. I chose money over everything. And it's one of probably the biggest decisions that I made against the Lord, and I didn't realize it because it was so subtle. And little by little by little, with each degree, each move, each job change, I climbed the ladder, and I was always grateful. My dad got a gift every time, TV and VCR combo. He got a John Deere mower one time. I mean, there were things that got passed on, and I always acknowledged the success.
So when did God stop you in your tracks and turn you in a different direction?
So Justin and I had an incident one night, and the incident was a domestic incident. And after that situation, God came to me. It was as clear as day. You know the plans I have for you.
Wow.
And I can remember so much of all the things we went through and all the transition during that time. God spoke to me so clearly that He had a moment in my life from the very beginning. He had a hand on my life from the very moment, and that I needed to make some changes. And after that situation and everything that we went through, I stopped in my tracks, and success became 10, 11, 12 down the rung of the ladder, and God became paramountly important to me.
Well, success didn't drop. The definition of what success meant changed for you.
Yes, and that's what I meant by the way I said it.
Yeah.
Is that what success looked like to me.
Yeah.
And being on the front page of the paper or whatever you want to say about it, it was a very different look. And my success to me became, what can I do for the Lord in my daily walk every single day? And
Amen.
Getting in a relationship with the Lord that you share on a cellular level, and I mean all the way down where you commend every part of you to Him, that changed. And I began to hand over the things that were important to me. Financial security, that went to the Lord. And He can and does do that, governs that. But you have to come in and give away those things that you want control over, but you want to be, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Well, that goes for women too, even though it might not say it like that. And I wanted them to be ordered by Him and not by me.
I agree with Cherie, not just in her life, but in mine. The incident we went through changed our lives, our walk with the Lord. I'll back up just a minute and go, we met each other at that major manufacturer of lawn and garden equipment.
Okay.
We both had, as we talked about to know each other, we both had little girls. And we, of course, showed pictures of our children, and they looked like identical twins. I'll have to send you a picture, maybe you can throw it up there. And they were just little, and they looked like identical twins. But we got to get these kids together to play together. And, of course, a relationship developed from there. And, we didn't have our priorities where they should be. And both of us had things we put before the Lord by far. And that incident, I think we both came out of it with, what now? I thought our relationship was over. I thought, I'd messed up, she'd messed up. But God. And we came out of it with a renewed sense of we need to, put God in the middle of our relationship. Let Him steer our lives, because we're making a mess of it, making our own decisions. And it started there. And we changed. We stopped doing some things we shouldn't have been doing. We got back into church. We hadn't been in church faithfully. And man, wow. I mean, we've been married almost 9 years this year. 9 years. Mm-hmm. And the last 5 or 6 have just been wonderful. We dramatically changed the course of our lives, and all the credit goes to God. And I'll let you tell the rest of it, but I feel exactly like you do. So,
well, I think from Justin's perspective in that situation is a great perspective, because that's exactly what happened. Things changed, very much so changed. Our lives, the way we parented, all the things that we did, beyond that time frame, just became better. And you just have to understand that as you make success or a job or whatever it is you put at the center of your life, that's your focus.
Yeah.
But when it becomes God, man, he will absolutely, He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him.
Right.
And when you get up in the morning and you're diligently doing that every day, and there's so many people that gleaned into my life and told me things about how I prayed even. And Justin and I pray together, daily. But the things that become so important to you, change when it's God at the very center of everything you do. And he governed. I mean, I told Justin, we were riding down the road leaving Crossroads one day, and I told him, I said, look, I said, everything you know right now is going to change. And he kind of looked at me. I said, it's not going to be the same music. It's not going to be the same things that we watch on TV. Everything's going to change. And God changed them one after another. And it was the grandest moment in our lives when he took over. And I mean, folks sing about Jesus taking the wheel, but he had the wheel, and he's had it since that day.
So that the word disciple went from a noun to a verb. It was action oriented. Your discipleship was kicked into gear, and
Well, speaking of, tell us the story of when that literally happened, when you stopped serving a major manufacturer and went to work for the Lord. How did that happen?
So one of the significant things that tells this story in a little different way is I go back to a high school reunion, and it's debatable whether or not it was 25 or 30 years, but we'll just say that it's 30. And as I went back to do that reunion, I'm talking to my fellow students, fellow classmates, and we're having conversations, and I said to them, and I did not realize this until I was telling this story to our pastor, that I was going to retire early and that I was going to teach. And I just said it matter-of-factly, like it was written, like it was written out that that's what was going to happen in my life. And I didn't understand the comment and how significant it was going to become. But it's obviously, that's what I do at the co-op is teach. And so,
right. So you uttered a prophetic word of your future that you really didn't have a clue about.
At that time, that's really what happened.
Wow.
And I didn't understand that I had said that and meant it with everything inside me. Just knew this is what I'm going to do. There was no question. And later in life, so probably 5 years after that, I'm at work one day, and one of the ER managers comes down the stairs, employee relations, comes down the steps and says, Cherie, I've got great news for you. And I said, whoo, okay, give it to me.
Yeah.
And she says they're offering a buyout at the factory, and it's going to get your grade level. And so I said, excuse me, say that one more time. And so she said it again, but interimly, I had already told them that my intention was to leave.
Okay.
So she was ready to quit for free. Okay.
Okay, quit for free.
So when John Deere has a bad quarter, a bad year, their strategy is to catch management that's climbed the ladder and made a little decent money and try to buy them out, give them a,
okay.
You know what I'm saying? And so pay them not to ever work there again, basically.
Oh, okay.
And they'll bring in younger, less highly paid folks to fill those positions. So she was ready to quit for free anyway. And they're like, here, we'd like to pay you, a year and a half's worth of salary to leave and never come work for us again. So what was your answer to that question?
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
So they gave me an opportunity. It's called an early buyout, and the specifics of it is a private situation. But they did give me an opportunity to go in good standings. The provision is you don't come back in that capacity ever again.
Okay.
And sign paperwork stating so. But the grand thing is I had an out, and I had a date. And that date was 8 days after the original date that I had said that I was going to do.
Wow.
So
I'll never forget that phone call.
Yeah.
She made a phone call to me and said, you're never going to believe this. They're offering me a buyout. And I said, are you going to do it? She said, I've already sent the paperwork back in duplicate.
I sent it twice. I did.
Just to make sure.
Just to make sure they got it.
I wanted to make sure, but from this point on, and I want people to understand what happens to me at this time. You're talking about something that I loved more almost as the next breath I take. It identified who I was. This job made me in my mind. And this is a pivotal moment in my life when God became the very definition of why I do anything I do, was the day I shut that door. And when I walked out, I had no idea what was waiting for me. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had people telling me I need to take 6 months off. I need to do this. And all these things of what I needed to do. And here's the biggest but God moment in my life. But God had the plan. He had the plan. I mean, it was all laid out in front of me. I just had no idea how quickly this was going to transition. And so, thusly, we're already involved in Crossroads Cowboy Church. We're already here. We're serving in different capacities. But my life's work came along, at least in my thoughts, and the ability to teach kids, the ability to teach about finances, and I do that for the adults. And my time was spent here. And I did not make the church my God either, because there's moments in ministry that you can do that. You can put your focus so much along serving the church that you're not actually serving the Lord.
Yeah.
And that took a little while to temper me. It took the right folks gleaning information to me and teaching me and showing me. Because if you'll remember, there was a key part in my story where I talked about responsibility as a 4-year-old. Mm-hmm. And it became, I would absorb it and I would take it and I would move with it. And my work and what I was doing became what I wanted to do all the time. And that's not necessarily what God wants you to do.
So you were wrestling with this whole definition of who you are. Your source of value came from your position or the things that you could do. And that's a hard thing to let go of. I lean that way too in temperament. And sometimes, Lord's prying your fingers loose from that, said, no, don't let your job describe you. Don't let your activities describe you. I need you to sit down and relax and let me describe you. And that's what it sounds like this whole season is God is redefining you in his terms, not by your definition, but by who he has made you to be. And that's a wonderful process to go through. Not always easy, not always without pain, but to know that God is finishing the work that he began in you. That's what it is. He's finishing who you are.
I think when you start to realize that God truly has a purpose in your life, we all have that, the commission to tell people about Jesus. We all have that. Mm-hmm. But our individual giftings, our individual likes, the things that we're good at, that he has spent our entire lives honing and implanting and all those things, come to fruition when you work in the ministry. And I think for me, having the ability to talk to these kids and teach them and spend time with them and give them information of all those years and all those things that I walked through. And, the most paramount thing to me is at the end of the year and the kids look at you and there'll be a moment. I had one say to me today, Cherie, I thank you for teaching me. And then you realize, what you do is for a reason. And, you understand that God gives you this knowledge in your mind, and it's something that Justin and I pray for all the time, is divine wisdom. And divine wisdom meaning I'm not going to act or react to Cherie. I want to act and react as if Christ would react. Yeah. And I got an opportunity to exemplify that in my life the other day, and it was a situation that was going on in our family, but I had asked the Lord, give me an opportunity to hold my hands out just like you did to a child. Give me an opportunity to love the way you did. And he did. He gave me that opportunity. And I stood there and I extended my hands just like Christ did, if you see him in a picture. And I don't know that he was always in that posture, but I think so a lot of times, because it's a posture that says, come to me, you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And that's how I felt. But he gives us those opportunities to live out that ministry in our lives, and I thank him for that. I thank him for changing my life. I thank him for taking the anger, and that's a very important part of the story, that I talked about the bitterness of my parents. Mm-hmm. But I was very angry person. I was mad because I was adopted. I was mad that I was lied to about that adoption, because I wasn't told till I was 12, and then told that I had siblings till I was 33. And so there were significant parts of the journey that were left out. I tried to do that in a different way with Emma, and explained to her early on. And so she was told in the beginning, you were adopted. She was told, and so. But I think all of that embedded in me a point where I was bitter and angry myself over my mom's circumstances, over having to be so responsible, over never getting to be a kid. Yeah. But I think that resolvement of that, I have folks that speak into my life. The prayer team is one group of those folks. And my mentor sat me down one day, and she has this way, if you've been around her very much, Sister Lee, and she'll poke you and say, we got to get to the root. And so I had studied root cause analysis in my job. Mm-hmm. I knew what it meant. You have to get to where's it causing? What's causing this? Yeah. And so she would poke me and say, Cherie, we need to get to the root. And I had no idea what that meant. I know what root cause is, but I didn't understand that there was a root at this. And the root was the anger that my dad had, the anger that he had exemplified toward my mom all these years over her wreck. And I think the final thing is that as you recognize these things and you see what's coming up in the root and you see that it was this or that and you identify it, then you have to walk through it and you have to start the healing process.
Yeah.
And so when I knew I was going to talk about my testimony, telling the story of something that happened 40 odd years ago, I was not looking forward to that in the sense of how emotional would I get. But it helped me get to the root of what hurt me all those years ago. And so now I can call it by name and I can move forward.
Wow. Well, if you had a word or two for somebody who's watching who might be going through something similar, or at least it feels similar, what would be your concise, encouragement to help them along their path?
So if they're going through adoption issues, if they're going through caring for a loved one, if they're going through marriage issues, financial issues, any of that stuff, anything that you can relate to, speak to those folks.
I think one of the things that we often don't recognize in ourselves is that our journey is for a reason, and the things that we endure is a teaching point. And the Lord always has something good comes out of everything. Anything that was meant for evil will be turned for good, and I believe that there's a caveat to that, meaning that we have to take some responsibility in that, and we have to accept help where help is given. And I would say to anybody that no matter your circumstances, you are an overcomer. He tells you you are an overcomer. He tells you that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. And so when you realize those things and embed them in your heart and put them in the very pores of your being, it changes who you are.
Yeah.
And you have to accept that even though we go through trials and tribulations in life, that's all they are is trials and tribulation, that there's a much greater gift that awaits you on the other side as we go to that heavenly reward that we have in the end.
Yeah.
And I think as we understand that there's also crowns that we can be given there, crowns of righteousness, and it goes on and on. But I think as you realize that there's a reward in heaven that awaits us, then your behavior becomes about just like his, one of grace. They crucified him.
Yeah.
And he looked down and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So we have to give grace no matter what we go through in our lives. We have to accept responsibility for what we need to do in that. And I think the other thing is that we have to be able to accept love. And adoption sometimes takes that from you because you feel abandoned and you're not easily loved. And those around you can construe that to be one thing, that you're not approachable, or maybe that you're unfriendly or anything like that. But really what it truly is it can be a situation that you've allowed to not allow yourself to be loved. You have to give that to the Lord.
Yeah.
And say, I want to be loved.
Yeah. You have to reorient the fact that you are valued. You're valued by God. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I know it's just part of your testimony. And I hope that the words that you shared and the stories that you've passed along to us can find a seed in someone's heart, especially those who might not have a relationship with Jesus. So, Justin, why don't you go ahead and close it out? You made it through this relatively unscathed. You did well.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Well, as always, thank you for joining us. If you don't care, hit that like, share it, subscribe, all those wonderful things we ask you to do. Check out previous videos if you haven't watched them, and check out our future videos. And we thank you for joining us today.
All right. Lord bless.